Hello and welcome back. Week 8 of Introduction to Data Science. Let's start this video as we normally do by having a look back at what we were learning last week as a quick reminder before moving on to some of the quiz questions and some of the stuff that is coming up this week and on the rest of the course. So last week was a bit of a different week. We were looking at data ethics, and we had a number of guest lecture videos, so lectures from experts across the field about ethics and bias and all these other problems in data science that can arise if we don't think carefully about the data and the algorithms that we use. That's going to tie nicely into this week as we start to think about modeling, but hopefully, with some of the experience that you've been gaining throughout this course, especially in visualizations, there was a number of things that you could already think about. Well, how does this reflect on some of the things that I'm interested in for my own projects, for example, or outside of your projects too? So there was a number of videos by both Mina and other people that you could go through. We had a number of assignments due last week, the labs, the quizzes, but more this week, as you can see. So we'll get to that when we talk about this week. We had a few readings, a little bit less readings than normal, just to kind of reflect the amount of videos that I suggested. Now, I'm sure not every one of you got through all the videos because there was quite a lot, but hopefully you got through some of the main ones. The code along was specifically about proposals and the projects. So hopefully if you haven't had a look at the code along, then you do that. It wasn't a code along that me and Alex did that week. We wanted to focus on catching up with some of the marking, but it was one from last year. So we hope that's useful if you've got any questions about the project as well to maybe skim through. And we didn't have any interactive R tutorials because we were focusing less on coding and more on data ethics. And they will come back this week, so we'll have more of those interactive R tutorials again. Let's go back up to quiz 5, which was due last week, and have a look at some of the common questions. Most of the questions on quiz 5 were about use of the map function. So let's just take a minute to kind of reflect on it. Maybe because of the labs, I think we've come across map again. So hopefully you've got a bit more experience now, but maybe it's worth just re-going over why we could use it in this case. So question 4 was showing how we could essentially just get the mean of each of our columns using something more traditionally used by us, using summarize and then the means. But we could also map the mean function over each numerical column of the data set. And the question was asking you to figure out which of these was appropriate. Now, before we move on, let's just start with the documentation, as hopefully you would do for most functions if you're a little bit confused about what they do. So let's go to the documentation, have a quick look before returning to it and figuring out why this particular one was the right answer. All right, so the map functions, and you can see that there's multiple map functions, are there by transforming their input by applying a function to each element of a list or vector and returning the object of the same length as the input. And when we're doing it on a tibble, what that's going to do is it's going to apply to each column individually. Map has a little bit more flexibility embedded in it, but we're going to kind of ignore that for now. We're just going to focus on the ones that are very specific about saying what type of vector we want it to return of what particular type. So we can see that the way that we need to use these functions, say let's take for example DBL, because that's the one that we're going to end up actually using. So that DBL is just shorthand for double, and it needs an X and then it needs an F. So what's X? X is a list or atomic vector. In this case, it's going to take each column individually and it's going to use it as a vector. And F is going to be the function that we're going to apply to that vector, or in this case, the column. And so hopefully that's relatively straightforward. There's a number of intricacies to it that you can have a look into in the documentation, along with a number of examples. But let's have a play with around with some of the data in the quiz and get a little bit more understanding of what that means. Let's start with the options that aren't correct instead of having a look at the ones that are correct. So this one's formatted a bit weirdly due to probably an error that I made. So it says data frame object can't convert a data frame object to a function. And what that's trying to say to you here is it's saying that this bit here is not a function, and it's not a function, it's a data set. And that's because we've got them the wrong way around. We're trying to, this was the function and this is the data set. And if you remember back to the documentation, it said we need to put the data in first, and then we need to apply the functions. That's why the second one's not correct. This one here, let's try this and give it a run. It's saying that the mean in default argument is not a numerical logical, returning NA. So what's happening here is it's going to do it for the columns that are actually a double, but then when it gets to species, it gives us an NA. And so essentially that's causing a problem in our data. We've got this kind of warning here. And so we can probably use a cleaner way without a warning by removing that species first. So we'll do that in the correct answer. But first, let's have a look at the int. And you can see here that it's trying to coerce the double into an integer. So remember our data, if we have a look at the correct answer, let's copy and paste it in here. This will probably help. Has this point and all these other kind of values after the point. And so it doesn't want to convert this into an integer. It wants to keep it as a double. And so it has a problem when it's trying to do that. And that is because originally the data was a double, which you can hopefully see. It's a numeric vector. Up here, it's telling you with the, if up here in the skin, that it's a numeric, which we can interpret as a double. And so here we know that we need to use map DBL rather than map INT. And so that's why that one works and was the correct answer. And if we scroll down to this particular one, this one's thinking about, well, what's the output of the map going to be? So if we run this, we can see again, it's showing us that we've got a double integer. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to apply iris type of to get our output. Interestingly, this particular bit is not working. There we go. And so you can see that it returns double integer, which is useful, but we can also try some of the other ones and try to figure out why some of them work and why some of them don't. Map character is going to return it as a character, and it can return these values as characters. It makes sense because you know, you can convert things into characters pretty easily in R. The map logical, it can't convert its character to a logical. A logical is true false, and so it's a bit confused. It's like, how do I convert a double or an integer into a logical? So it gets a bit confused there. So that's not the correct answer. If we do map int, we're going to have the same problem. It doesn't know how to convert these into integers, so it doesn't bother about that. And the map data frame will work because it just outputs a data frame, and inside that data frame is, as you can hopefully see, characters. You can see that each one of these are character columns here. So essentially we've got our double integer. These are characters, much like we can apply the character here, except this time it's outputting a data frame, because what comes after map is what we want it to come out as. And so here we want it to come out as characters, here we want it to come out as a data frame, and in that data frame it's converted them into characters. So that's why question 4 and 5 work, and hopefully by now you've had a bit more of a play around with map, and so you can experience some of the intricacies of using this function, as well as maybe going to the documentation and reading some of the examples. So hopefully that clears that up a little bit. All right, so before we get into talking about what's coming up this week, I just want to go back over proposals and projects, and just note that we can do a reproposal, which means that you work on the things that me and Alex suggested you work on for your proposal and then resubmit to get a higher mark for the proposal stage. Now, please note that that's only 10 points out of the 100, so it's worth 10% of the final project. And you do need to tell me and Alex if you want us to reconsider and remark your proposal. The instructions, more specific instructions, will be found on the feedback, and that says issues on your GitHub repository. So please look there for what we propose you to change for the proposal. Now, you might also want to start thinking about, and we suggest that you do, some of these other bits, because as you can notice, like a lot of them marks are actually going to be for the presentation. In fact, half of them are for the presentation. And so it might be an idea to start outlining how you're going to approach this presentation. You might not have everything yet, but you might want to start outlining how you're going to distribute the work, what different slides are going to be, what you're going to try focus on, what narrative you're trying to tell. Now, the write-up can almost act like a script for your presentation because the write-up is very short. And so you don't need to read off the script. In fact, we don't want you to see you stood there just reading off a script, but it can be something that you can practice and to kind of guide you along as to how you're going to walk through the presentation. It doesn't have to be word for word in the presentation. You're not having to learn it like an actor or anything, but use it as a scaffold for when you do get to the presentation to help you know what you're going to talk about as well. Then these other bits are going to be reproducibility and organization. This is something that me and Alex are going to have a look at your repositories at the end when we get to the deadline, which I'll go back and double check in a second. The team and peer evaluation. So this is where you evaluate your teammates, and if there's a consensus that one particular individual didn't contribute as much, that might affect their grades. Really, that's just so we know who contributed and who didn't to the project, because we really, really do want you to work together. Teamwork is really important, as we outline further above. And so we want to really push that, much like the labs, you've been developing your teamwork skills, hopefully, and now is the time to test them and to work on them for the proposal. And then there's a small percentage for classmates evaluation. So you are also going to evaluate other proposals and projects as part of your homework, and also live in the presentation as well. And they're going to be weighted a lot lower than the marks that me and Alex and the other course team give, but they are still going to count as well. And so we do that because we want you to see all the cool work that your classmates are doing, and also motivate you during the presentations to keep active engagement, to follow along, and hopefully that will mean that that bit is more fun and interactive than if we weren't, meaning that you were kind of looking along and trying to focus like me and the course team were trying to be doing on the presentations themselves. So in order to get to this, we do recommend that you start planning weekly meetings alongside the workshops as well. Try find a time where everyone is free that you can work on the projects together. You might be tempted to just leave it all until the final week, but I guarantee you that you will have other homework for other courses. And so it's a good idea to chip away at this over time rather than leaving it to the last minute. So try find a time that works for everyone. And obviously this year you can meet up in person, something that you couldn't do last year, but you can always implement the tools that are available to you, such as Teams or Zoom, or even like WhatsApp. Obviously GitHub, you can have conversations on GitHub too. So there's lots and lots of ways that you can work synchronously and asynchronously on this project with your teammates as well. This week, we're starting the week with writing advice as well. A very, very short. It's about 2 minutes from the creators of South Park to describe their writing process. And we think that it's really useful when thinking about describing your projects. Rather than just going then. It's useful to think about, here is what we're presenting, and this is because of this, and we found this because of that, and therefore this, but you need to factor in this. And so it makes it a lot more of an interesting and memorable project when you're describing things in those terms, rather than just saying, we found this, and then we also found this, and then we also found this. If you can tie them together and to create a narrative for your presentation and for your write-up, you're going to find that you get higher marks because it's more interesting for us to read, and the project will feel more complete and more of a whole that way than just a list of different things that you found. So do have a watch of that. It's a bit of fun, but hopefully it's a valuable lesson in how to keep your audience engaged when you're telling almost like a story, but these things are obviously a data story in a sense that you're trying to present to us. So please take that advice on board as well. Let's have a look at what else is coming up this week as well. So as I mentioned, we've got this writing advice we're starting off, and then the rest of it is going to be modeling. And we're going to be looking at models with just one predictor variable. and one outcome. And then we're also going to have a look at multiple predictors, as we can see here. And we're also going to have a look at linear and non-linear relationships as well. But the focus is going to be on interpretation. So fitting your models, obviously checking how good those models are, but we're also going to be looking at, well, how do we interpret? What information do these models actually give us? And that's going to be a really important part of this week and moving beyond. And also thinking about when we get to your projects, you might want to think about, well, how does this modeling help us interpret the data that we're using for our projects too? And we encourage you to give it a go on some of the data that you're using for your project. Now, that can be thought of as your application exercise for the week, because we don't have application exercises this week, although we do have interactive art tutorials as well. And you can, of course, always ask for help on Piazza and come to the student hours and to get synchronous help that way as well. We have some assignments due this week that I want to mention. We've got the quiz as always. This quiz is a little bit more of a review. It's kind of going over some of the questions that you found hard. It's really there to kind of reflect on your growth, and it's not really there to assess your memory. So please feel free to go back to previous weeks and remind yourself in order to help you out with that quiz. But hopefully, you know, it ties in with what we were doing last week, which was a little bit of a break away from coding. And so this is why the quiz was more of a review. We have the lab that's due tomorrow at time of recording. And we also have the homework and the project take 2. And again, any questions, please let us know. I just want to reiterate once more that we only mark the MD file, the .md file. So please make sure that you are knitting, committing, and pushing throughout working on your homeworks. The reasons that we do this is to make sure that we're able to mark all the work as quick as we can. We do try get homeworks marked on the whole before the next homework is due, but we can't always do that just due to the numbers and, you know, the time that the tutors have available to them to do the marking. But we do really try. And so marking that .md file is part of the reason why we're very strict about that, because if we didn't do that and we had to run your code for every single person, that just adds time to the marking. And there's just no way that we'd be able to feasibly get the turnaround in time. We do document on the instructions. Please commit, push. Now's a good time to do that. Make sure you got a reasonable commit. Hopefully this has come out in some of the feedback you've already got from homework 1, so you should be familiar by now. We dropped the lowest score as well, so if you had problems with this in homework 1, then it shouldn't be affecting your final score, because now you know for the future homeworks not to make the same mistake. And obviously at the very, very bottom of the instructions, I also have a big important bit. It says important, and it says how do we mark it? And again, there it's reiterating that it's really, really important that you knit and push your work. Another good thing to do is to double check on GitHub, because we only have a look at what is on GitHub. So please go on the GitHub version of the repository. So not the one that you're working on RStudio Cloud, but the one on GitHub. And double check that everything has worked, that you've committed correctly, that you've pushed, it's the latest version. And then that way, we as the course team are able to mark the work that you want us to mark. The other thing to know is when you're doing late work, please, you should really be telling me before the deadline is up. And that's what it says in the policies. I've been a little bit lax on that, but that does mean that if you email me on the weekend after it was due, I don't tend to check my emails on a weekend, so it won't get open until Monday. And so please do message me if you can that you are going to be handing in late before the deadline. And that way I can guarantee that it's open for you, because I can open it on Thursday and I can open it Friday for you to work on. Same with extensions. Extensions, it has that 4-day window, just like the late work. So please make sure that your turnaround is within that time frame. It's all there to make sure that we keep the course moving, that we try get the feedback to you as quick as possible. It's just with the extensions, you don't have that penalty. If you're really struggling, then you might want to look into a special circumstance, which just means that that week's work or whatever the week's works that you've been affected by won't count towards your final grade. Again, The rules and who grants the extensions is the same as the special circumstances. It's by a different team. It's not done by me and Alex. And the links to the rules and the website are on our website under the policy section. So please read that if you're having a look and struggling with the work. You can, of course, always message me and Alex, and we'll try help you as best as we can. So thank you. I hope you're looking forward to this week. And yeah, we'll see you in some of the synchronous sessions as always. See you later.